Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Ella, and in this video I am going to be teaching you how you can improve your essay writing skills as quickly as possible with this template that I used in pretty much all of my essays. Just a quick disclaimer, as always, this is how I wrote my essays, the template that I used. Like with everything, nothing fits every single person. Everyone has their own different writing technique and writing style, so this may not work exactly for you, but I really hope that you can at least take some points from this and tweak it a little bit, twist it into your own style and improve your essay writing. Another point to mention quickly is that I did AQA for English literature, so this will be tailored towards getting full marks, or as close to full marks as you can on that specific specification. However, if you're really stuck, then I'm pretty sure that it can work with a lot of other exam boards. I just know that exams are slightly different, so for me I had to compare text that I knew, but I know, say for OCR I think it is, you compare text with unseen, so it may work a little bit differently, but the general shape is still the same. So first things first, intro. Now this is basically your line of argument for the whole essay. So you need to have something that relates to the question, obviously. So say the question is, and I'll use in his spectacles an example, the question is, how does Priestley portray Mrs. Burling? Your line of argument needs to be centered around Mrs. Burling, but I also made it a little bit more specific. So I immediately from the start said, Priestley presents Mrs. Burling as a cruel, cold, heartless, whatever you want to call her, woman, and that kind of sets your tone for the whole essay. Now in your intro, or in my intros, I always included a theme or a genre, a bit of context, because that also provides a little bit of a springboard as to where I want to go with my context. Obviously you've learned a lot of context about your books or novels or poems, so you want to be able to refine that down so your brain's not going haywire throughout the essay going, oh but I need to include this and I need to put this in. No, you're just focusing on, so say for example, patriarchy in, or the class system in spectacles. So now you're focusing on that, and you can delve more into depth about that particular piece of context. Also in my intro, if I was comparing two poems, so in, well, I can't remember what paper it was, but in the paper that you have to compare two poems, the intro would start off something like, both this author and this author portray the theme in a certain way, maybe include a quote if you really want to. So I know often an intro is one of the most daunting things because it's all about getting the ball rolling. A lot of students, and including myself, really struggled to get started in an exam or in any essay in general. So the obvious advice for that is plan. You need to do at least 5 minutes, and I spent about 5 minutes in exam conditions. So in, you know, if you're timing yourself to write an essay in 45 minutes, 5 of those minutes need to be dedicated to planning your essay, and that plan will help you with your intro. So first of all, I would, and if you need help on getting ideas straight away, if you think that when you look at a question on paper your mind just goes blank, then check out my other How to Revise English video, where I talk about how I kind of made myself go, ah yeah, that reminds me of this thing when I look at a certain keyword, and it's all to do with how you revise. So if you need help with that, go and check that video out. When I start planning, I immediately look at the keyword, so say Mrs. Burling in that question that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and I would think, okay, what comes to mind immediately? Don't think about what the examiner wants to see, because the examiner wants to see what you think. There's no point trying to think about all the times you've analysed a certain character in class. You need to think about what you think on the spot, because that's going to be a whole lot easier because you know exactly where you're going. And that's one of the reasons why I have not included some of my essays in this video, because I don't want you to have a look at how I have written and think, right, okay, I'm going to remember that piece of analysis, because you won't. It's not your trail of thought, it is mine, and you will come up with just as good ideas, even probably better than mine. When you think of your own, you are creating a more unique essay. How many people are going to touch on the Titanic, which is absolutely unsinkable according to Mr. Burling, and talk about how arrogant he is? That's a generic quote. But if you can think of a quote that particularly stood out to you in an exam, or sorry, when you were reading the novel, then you can immediately start to craft a more unique response. And that is how I started planning. I just blurted out whatever I could think of about those key ideas. So if the question is about theme, so how is suffering portrayed in this poem and another poem of your choice? Okay, so what do I think of when I think of suffering? Is it mental or physical? Pick one, or maybe show how, if you really know two poems really well and one of them looks at mental and one of them looks at physical, there's your first comparison point. You don't need a lot, but just start with what you think of when you look at that question for the first time and go from there. Okay, so now the general paragraph structure. Now, I was not the fastest writer in the exam conditions. I certainly was faster than, say, if I was doing a home, but I would still only do, and I say only, I would do 2 or 3 quite decent sized paragraphs. So I'm talking about that much on a page. Obviously it depends on how big your writing is and how, I don't know, how concise you are with your words. Some people like to beat around the bush, but I always advise going straight to the point, because then you've got more time to put more analysis in. And there's no point going, the writers show this in various ways, one of which is, no, don't do that, that's just waffling. Examiner's not going to mark you on writing an extra sentence to someone else. So my general structure for paragraphs, and I know quite a few people probably have heard of this, is the PEASL, or you may have heard of PEAL, or, you know, the various other, I can't remember the word, acronyms, or, you know what I'm on about. The various ways of remembering how to frame your paragraph. So mine was PEASL. So I began with a point, which linked to my line of argument in my intro, but would be in more depth. So I would say my intro said, Mrs. Burling is portrayed as a cold-hearted character. And then my first paragraph would start with, in the beginning of the novel, or, you know, at this point in the novel, Mrs. Burling is shown, or is implied, don't use shown, it's not tentative language, as they say. Tentative language always opens up new avenues to go down different routes and use alternative interpretations. God, that's a tongue twister. And that obviously helps you get more marks anyway. So I've made my general point in my intro, and then my point in my first paragraph could be something like, Priestley, or the author or the poet or whoever you're studying, uses a technique or a certain structure or something like that, something you've picked out to study in that paragraph, to portray Mrs. Burling as one who doesn't have many feelings. You might say that in a bit nicer way than that, but that's the general formula. And there I have included the point, so the P from PEASL, and the first E from PEASL, which is evidence. So I'd use a quote there, and if you can, embed it, because that is great. It shows the examiner you've got a bit more understanding of the text. If you can't, then don't worry. But a tip for doing that is look at the quote and see how you'd fit that in any sentence, and then work backwards from there until you can work it into your paragraph. Just a little piece of advice. So then we come on to the Z and the E from PEASL, like the second E. And they kind of intertwine a little bit, so I always start with the second E first. So in effect, PEASL should be spelled P-E-E-Z-L. I don't know. It depends on how you want to word your paragraph. But I started by looking at the quote in general, or the structure, or whatever you've chosen to study, and look at what that in general means. So not looking at anything in particular, but say, I can't even remember any quotes now, but you've picked out a quote. What does that whole thing spring to mind immediately? And jot that down. The next thing, the next sentence or next little part of a paragraph would be the zoom. So that's where I use my Z. And that is where you pick out a keyword or a key phrase. So say, if I'll just use Titanic quote because I know that one. So the Titanic, unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. I would pick out the word unsinkable, surprise, surprise. So the first layer would be the repetition of unsinkable, maybe. So the zoom of that quotation would be the adjective, I think. Unsinkable. Please don't come after me if it's wrong. I don't know. I think it's an adjective. It's describing a noun. Yeah, okay. It's an adjective. What that means, what that suggests. You know, all of these words. So connotes is a good word to use if you want to up your sophisticated vocabulary. Suggests works just as well. Implies. One has the impression of, if you want to, you know, make your paragraph a little bit longer, but still not waffling. If you're comparing, so for AQA, you compare poems. So say you've zoomed in on Remains. I know that's the title of a poem, but you can still do that. You can still analyze the title. Say you've zoomed in on Remains. So that connotes a broken, I don't know, broken environment or broken person or whatever you want to think of. How can that analysis link to another poem? So with your alternative interpretations, one way you could go about it is, how would another person view that same quote? And this is where you could bring in your context. So you are obviously a modern reader. If your text is quite old, then you could say a Victorian reader may read this in a different light. That could again give you a really detailed analysis, because you're then talking about how the impact of the novel or the book has changed over time. And that is also a great way to push your analysis up, because you're then thinking about more than one person and showing the examiner that you're looking at more than one point of view, and you're really going into depth about that. So now the L of Peasel, that is obviously linking back to your argument. So you've made all of these points. Hopefully they interlink in some way. That's always a good start. Now you need to make a sentence or a couple of sentences, probably no more than that, hopefully. You don't want to go too overboard. You want to get writing onto your second paragraph. You want to show the examiner, okay, this is what I've got from this quotation. You may be bringing in other quotations to support, so that could come in your further layers of analysis. So furthermore, this is also shown when the writer uses this as this. This could show, or suggest, sorry, not show, and then bring those two quotations together. There's no point, throwing out random quotations if you're not going to bring them together. And your link also helps that. You need to bring all of what you've said into one thing that then links back to your point at the beginning of the paragraph, but then also your line of argument. If you have a continuous line of argument, you're therefore going to get better marks, or at least the examiner knows you know what you're on about. With a link, you don't want to be just repeating what you said for the point, but say you started off the point saying, I'm going back to Mrs. Burling now. The writer uses this technique as a way to perhaps imply that Mrs. Burling does not care about others. And in the link, you can say that she is a selfish woman who considers her reputation more important than Ava's life, Ava's feelings, whatever you want to say. So you're not saying again that Mrs. Burling is cold, but you're implying, because obviously if someone is selfish, then they don't really care about others. So, you're linking them together without saying the same thing. So always think about connotations of the word that you're really zooming in on. So I would use that framework for all of the paragraphs that I do. Again, I normally do between 2 and 3. It's normally around 2. They are probably maybe half a page each. I never really wrote a lot, but then I also had quite small handwriting, so bear that in mind. Don't take that as you need to write half a page, or you need to only write half a page. If you write more, then brilliant. If you write less, and your writing isn't really tiny, then I would suggest trying to maybe look at more ways of looking at a certain quote, developing your layers of analysis, and seeing if you can write a little bit more. So now you've got your intro, your couple of paragraphs, and now you need to work on your conclusion. So this is again bringing together everything. So it's like a giant link, how I saw it. So you've got your 2 paragraphs, you're now going to link both of those together. So you've looked at different parts of context, different quotes, different layers of analysis, how different people would view a certain quote, and bring that all together, and how that relates back to your intro, where you were talking about your first line of argument. Again, continuous line of argument throughout, and you're going to get higher marks. So my conclusions were never too long. They were only a couple of sentences, and I wouldn't stress about them too much. Again, it's the main part of your essay that is going to get the most marks. A conclusion is just a nice way to really show the examiner, I know exactly what I'm on about, even if you really don't have a clue and you've just been waffling your way through the whole essay. I've done that a couple of times. I know how it feels. Obviously, it's nice to know where you're going, and revising in a way that you can just pick out quotes from the top of your head and link them together straight away will also help, obviously, in your understanding of a text. But the conclusion, so Mrs. Burling is continuously portrayed as a woman who only cares about improving her reputation and does not mind sacrificing others in her attempts to do so. That sounds actually pretty decent. Well done, Ella. Pat on the back. So you may want to include some context a little bit. Your conclusion doesn't need to be, you know, several sentences long. It does not need to be nearly as big as your actual paragraphs. Just a little finishing line to bring together everything that you have said in that essay. Well, not everything, obviously. You know, the key points. One thing I wanted to address is first of all, this video came from the questions that I got from one of you lovely lot that asked, help, I need help with my essays, please can you help? And I gave her a lot of advice, and we were having a chat, and this lovely person was just very concerned about getting the right vocabulary. When I'm essay writing, it comes quite naturally, and I'm very fortunate in that sense, but I know that it came from reading a lot of example essays. So you can find them online. The exam boards themselves publish some essays to help the teachers. Obviously, your teachers are a great source. Mine often, if I gave her an essay, she would scribble out words and write better ones for that. Obviously, thesauruses as well, so if you don't know another word for suggests, Google it. There's an online thesaurus, even if you don't have one, because I don't have one, you know, a real one, I just use Google. But stuff like that, if you can develop your vocabulary, you might find it easier to write an essay. That being said, having the best vocabulary in the world does not guarantee you getting high marks. It is more about you showing that you can understand and analyse a text, and you can have a continuous line of argument. Again, you don't need to have a thesaurus in your brain to pass your GCSE. That is not a requirement. Okay, so yes, you get marks for, I don't know, being more perceptive and developed, which can come from having a wider range of knowledge about vocabulary, but you can still get a very decent grade with just limited vocab. So I would always advise, even if you don't need to stretch your vocab, to go and read other essays, because they are an ideal source for different structures like this one. Obviously, a lot of people have different ways of writing an essay. You might find that others apply to you more. Obviously, great, go and do that, go and do your research. Please don't compare yourself to others, which is why I didn't include my essays in this. If you really want, I will do another one where I can break down one of my essays for you and really show my thought process throughout that. But I didn't want to put this in here, like put those in this video particularly, because I don't want you to link my template with my writing. My template can be used by lots of people, but my writing is specific to me, because that is obviously my brain's thought process, my specific vocabulary. You will know words that I don't, and I know words that you don't. Everyone is individual, everyone has their own writing style, as I've already said. So yeah, if you really want to see some of my essays, then I can do that, but I didn't put that in this video for that particular reason. Thank you very much for watching this video, and please subscribe if you want to see more tips and tricks for GCSEs and see my journey through A-levels, all of that malarkey. I'm always going to be posting. I have kind of figured out a schedule for uploading, so I'm thinking of uploading Wednesday and Saturday. Might seem a bit random, but it works the best with my schedule right now. So we'll see how that goes. So I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye!